Okay, I'm going to run through the pre-trip and step inspection real quick on the engine compartment. Basically, you're going to go ahead and come to the front of the truck. You're going to look under it. And you're going to tell them that you're checking for any leaks, anything hanging, any debris. There are no leaks. You open the hood, get it all ready to go, and you're going to start over here. You're going to start on your passenger side general hoses. You're going to want to just kind of wave across the hoses so you don't single out any hose. You don't want to, my general hoses, and now you're only talking about this hose. So your general hoses, they are properly mounted and secured at both ends. No abrasion, bulges, or cuts, and they are not leaking. Then we're going to go down to our belt-driven alternator, which is the piece with the red wire going to it. A lot of people point at this. This is your air conditioning compressor. That is not your air compressor for your air tanks on your truck. This is for your air conditioning. So you want to go to your belt-driven alternator. It's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. The wires are attached. The belt is not worn, torn, or dry rotted or frayed. Actually, the term is cut and frayed, but I always say all of them. But the belt is not cut or frayed, and the free play is between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. Whenever I'm doing the pre-trip, I can never remember the exact term for it, so I always run through them all, but it's cut and frayed. Then we're going to come over to the driver's side. We're going to check your general hoses. Again, most of the hoses are all back here, but you've got some hoses here. So you're going to just check your general hoses. You're going to make sure they're properly mounted and secured at both ends. No abrasion, bulges, or cuts. And they are not leaking. Hoses are no abrasion, bulges, and cuts. Always remember the hoses, no abrasion, bulges, or cuts. Then we're going to go back and we're going to check our gear-driven air compressor. Things in the back of the engine are gear-driven. Up front, they're belt-driven. So in the back, we've got a gear-driven air compressor. It sits right about there. So if you point above the shock right there, you're going to be pretty much where it's at. Gear-driven air compressor, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. Right in front of that is our gear-driven power steering pump. We're going to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and not leaking. Again, if you just point here, if you wanted to, you can follow these hoses back and find it, but it's tucked back in behind that frame. We're going to move over to our oil level. It's our oil dipstick. We're going to make sure our oil level is filled to the manufacturer specification. We're going to move up to our belt-driven water pump. That's this here. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's not leaking. We're going to check the belt, make sure it's not cut or frayed, and that the free play is between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch. Now, how you check the belt is you grab the belt and you pull it by hand, but you do not do that during your pre-trip. And like I was doing, I'm pointing at this hose. Don't do that. And the only reason I say that is because I actually had my hand on the hose when I was pointing. I'm pointing through it. So you want to point at your belt, you know, right? Just point right through there. We'll come up to our coolant level. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. And because you add fluid to it, just like your oil, you're going to make sure that it's filled to manufacturer specification. And then we're going to come straight down here. We're going to go to our power steering fluid reservoir. It even says power steering fluid on it. So this is our power steering fluid reservoir. We're going to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking, and again, it holds fluid, so we're going to make sure it's filled to the manufacturer specification. We'll go down to our steering gearbox and hose assembly. We're going to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. We'll go ahead and move right to the front of it here, and we'll talk about the steering linkage. When you do your steering linkage, you want to point out all the linkage, which is, you know, basically just this here. My steering linkage, it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not missing any castle, or it has 3 castle nuts. Okay, so our steering linkage, it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It consists of our pitman arm, our drag link, our tie rod. It has 3 castle nuts and cotter pins. You want to point them all out, and the third one's back there. None are missing. It's not missing any of the 3 castle nuts or cotter pins. Then, easiest thing to remember is we're going to go right behind it there. Right here. That's a spring hanger. I'm going to check my spring hanger, front and rear. I'm going to make sure they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. We'll go over to our spring, our leaf spring. We're going to make sure it's properly mounted and secured, again, at the front and the rear, or both ends. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured at both ends, not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's not shifted. We'll go to our U-bolts. We're going to make sure our U-bolts are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and none are missing. There's 2 of them. We'll move to our shock absorber. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's properly mounted and secured at both ends, because it attaches at both ends, not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking. We'll go to our brake hose. We'll make sure it's properly mounted and secured at both ends. There's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts, and it's not leaking. And we'll add air because it's an air hose. Go to our brake chamber. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is not leaking air. Go to our push rod, slack adjuster, and push rod. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. And with the brakes released and pulled by hand, the push rod will not move more than 1 inch. We're going to go to our brake drum. You're going to want to come back here and point at your brake drum. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Then you'll point at the brake lining. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. It's free of oil and debris, and the friction material is not worn dangerously thin. And if you looked that dangerously thin number up, I believe it's 1/4 of an inch, but they just say dangerously thin. We're going to come up to our steer tire. We're going to make sure it's there's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts in the tread and the sidewalls, front and back. We're going to make sure the tread depth is no less than 4/32 of an inch. It's filled to proper manufacturer specification, and you're going to test it with an air gauge. We're going to go to our rim. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. There's no unauthorized welds. We're going to check our lug nuts. Make sure they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken, that there are none missing. There is no rust or powder residue, and there's no cracks around the bolt holes. While you're looking for rust or powder residue, if one of these were loose, it would, on an aluminum rim, you're going to leave a powder residue. Steel, you'll leave rust, and or if it's damaging the lug bolt, it could start rusting and leave rust. So that's why you're looking for that debris. We're going to check our hub seal, which on the steers and the trailer wheels, they're hub seals. On the drives on the tractor, those are axle seals. Doesn't really matter, they'll give you credit if you call them either or, but we're going to check our hub seals. We're going to make sure they're properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. They are not leaking, and they're filled to manufacturer specification. And that should conclude the engine compartment pre-trip. How did I do, teacher?
You did excellent. You got them all.
Thank you.